Hello and welcome to Sig Storytime. I am your host Sig, and I decided to make this channel solely for all the stories I either been recommended or discovered or remembered myself, and I wanted to share it all. If you're familiar with my TikTok account, I've already been doing this over there to a smaller audience, and I just want to kind of bring it over here. So without further ado, on this channel, you can expect all types of stories, whether it's aliens, paranormal, mythical, and legendary stories, to missing persons, police stories, military stories, really any story you can think of, you can kind of expect here. Um, the only one really kind of being excluded is anything political, simply for the subject being too controversial for most cases. But with that being said, let's get into it. We're going to be covering three stories today, and it's all from perspective of a realtor. So these are realtor paranormal stories. Sorry for the butchering, but with that said, it's all done in first person. So I will be using the first person connotation of I, speaking on behalf of the realtors in the stories. So let's get into it, shall we? While at work one day, I received a phone call and quickly recognized the caller as a client I assisted with a home purchase months earlier. Listening further, I detected serious concerns in his voice as I've never heard from him before. As the client talked, I listened while automatically running through a brief checklist in my head of his closed transaction. Paperwork completed correctly? Yes. Home inspection performed? Yeah, we did that. All inspections and issues addressed or negotiated? Check. Building permits research? Check. Insurance, title report, loans, and closing documents are all taken care of? Check. Running through a few more items in my head, then I hear him say the word ghost. After looking at many homes, this buyer and his wife ended up making an offer that would had some back and forth on the price, but it was ultimately accepted. Looking back at the transaction, there's really never any indication to suggest this would be anything but a normal home purchase. And everything was normal until the transaction closed, that is, which is when everything took a decidedly different turn. Not very long after the buyer and his wife moved into the recently purchased home, I learned they began to hear very strange noises, usually in the middle of the night around 2 to 3 a.m. But then things got even stranger. The sounds they heard appeared to emanate from inside the house for no readily explainable reason. Sounds like dropping of a tableware, moving furniture, bells ringing. You get the idea. There was no reason for them to expect these sounds, yet they were apparently coming from inside the house at very odd hours. After a while of having their sleep disturbed, the homebuyers grew concerned and began to ask around the neighborhood, "Do you hear strange noises at night like we do?" After being told no by at least one neighbor, another neighbor asked if the homebuyers knew about the event that had occurred inside of their home, and the new owners said, "No, we're not aware of this." Story specifics vary, but the neighbors apparently explained that a child had died inside the house and was laid to rest on the property. Understandably, this distressed the home buyers who thought they should have been told this before buying a home. After speaking with the home buyers, I next called the seller's real estate agent for the transaction and simply asked, "Did you know the property had a history of death in the house?" He stated yes, very quickly, and then followed up with what I knew aligned with the Oregon real estate agents are instructed regarding state real estate laws. But my principal broker told me we didn't have to disclose that. And he was correct. I also understood that particular realtor fiduciary responsibilities to his seller client because if the seller's agent had openly revealed the situation while marketing, there was a good chance the property would have never sold or would have sold for considerably less than what he was asking. Usually the rule is disclose even if it seems trivial. Yet in this instance, there was no state law requiring such disclosure, and the seller had a vested interest in just not bringing up the issue at all. As a result of the impact of their home purchase of the stigmatized home, the home buyers moved and ultimately just rented out the property. Witnessing this unpleasant situation had me researching to do better what might have been done differently. At the time, there was no online resources solely dedicated to determining if a house is stigmatized. On top of that, repeated online searches eventually turned up a single news story relating to the property. However, that was only accomplished by searching using the specific house address, and then it was buried in a list of other website information, and it was virtually a needle in a haystack situation. One reason stigmatized properties are often different is that they don't affect everyone the same. Another reason is because factors that stigmatize a property can vary. Some are undeniably gruesome, such as a violent death, while others are more common stigmatized factors have limited psychological effects, like bank foreclosure. Yet other stigmas, such as former meth lab, are doubly troublesome since they carry both a market stigma plus can render a property unfinanciable. Another reason why stigmatized properties are often uniquely different than usual issues, like say dry rot or a leaky roof, is that they frequently involve very human emotions. And when we consider what makes a home where children are raised, birthdays and anniversaries are celebrated, and many more cherished memories are created, common sense dictates that a house should be comport with the real estate concept of a quiet enjoyment. Least of all being woken up at 3 a.m. to the eerie sounds of a ghost child. A few years ago, I was helping an old friend sell a house in Morrison, Colorado. For those of you who don't know Morrison, it's a teeny tiny quaint town adjacent to the beginning ridge of the Rocky Mountains. My friend's mom had recently died of cancer inside the house. His father, distraught from her death, got bloody drunk one night and accidentally tripped and fell down a steep cliff while walking his dog Bono. Don't worry, the dog survived. Unfortunately, his dad, however, broke his neck and died. Let's fast forward a few months. I'm doing a preliminary check of the house's condition when in the kitchen, a knife literally was flung out of the silverware drawer right towards my foot. I narrowly dodged a trip to the hospital. I felt though it was a freak accident, but carried on with my inspection. Later that afternoon, a fierce snowstorm came through and essentially closed down the one-way dirt road out of town. I called my buddy up and he gave me permission to stay in the house, but under one condition. Sleep wherever, but don't sleep in my parents' room. The house sometimes makes noises during these snowstorms and can get pretty loud. He explained it has to do with the pipes running underneath his parents' bedroom. Sure enough, it's 3 a.m. and I began hearing pipes. Well, it wasn't pipes. It sounded more like somebody moaning, "Get out, get out, get out." The voice sounded like a demon and it literally scared the living wazoo out of me. I ran outside as fast as I could and I slept in my car the rest of the night on that frozen night. The next day, I wake up and I find scratch marks all along the side of my car. Inside the house, though, it's trash, just completely destroyed, and there was no sign of a break in. So I called the police and my buddy and I explained what happened. Because of the events and the fact that now I'm a personal suspect, I decided just to hand off my duties to my partner. That's, however, when things got even weirder. A week later, my friend calls me from a rest stop, telling me I'm not sure how I got here. Apparently, he had slept walked 5 miles in the middle of the night to this rest stop. I thought he was losing his mind until he told me this little bit of information after I picked him up. He told me, "You know that piping sound I told you about? I don't think that's the pipes. Maybe I'm going insane, but maybe I think the house is haunted. My grandfather always used to clamor on about that back in the day before he died of a mysterious heart attack. And I'm starting to think that this house is the reason my dad fell down that ravine." We drive back up to the house and go inside. At this point, I'm debating whether or not to get my friend to a shrink or just get him the hell out of this house. I tell him, "Hey, let's just stay at my place tonight, okay?" Suddenly, the floor starts to shake and a loud "Get out!" echoed through the hallways. My friend doesn't react. Meanwhile, on the other hand, I'm freaking out and I run to my car. I drive off to my house and I just sleep it off. I call my friend the next day. My friend tells me, "What are you talking about? You came over, we played cards, and you left. Nothing out of the ordinary." However, I told my friend, "How do you not remember what happened the night before?" And I was trying to convince him over the phone, later over coffee, but nothing seemed to take. He just wasn't believing me. After our conversation, however, I never heard from my buddy again. I tried reaching out to him, but he would just ignore me. A year passed and I saw his obituary. He died from a brain aneurysm at the age of 38. That day, I decided to take a break from the industry and went on a sabbatical to India. I'm not sure whether he went crazy, I went crazy, or the house is demonically possessed. And I'm not sure I'll ever get answers. About 15 years ago, I joined the real estate industry in hopes of selling my recently deceased great uncle's home in Buckhead, North Atlanta. The home is one of those southern style 3-story carriage homes that was more or less beaten up from years of just neglect. My uncle suffered from mental illness, so it's not really surprising the current state of his home. One hot summer day, while working with a contractor, we noticed a very cold draft of air flowing through the first floor's home office. This was strange because the AC was off and it was 94 degrees outside. The contractor thought the air could be flowing from the basement, so he went and checked. 5 minutes went by, then 10 minutes went by. Eventually, I opened the basement stairwell and yelled down the staircase, but an unfamiliar burly voice responds, "Help me." I ran downstairs only to find my contractor tied up and knocked out unconscious. Thinking this was a home burglary, I immediately called the police. Upon waking up, the contractor had absolutely no recollection of the events or even asking for help. He was immediately rushed to the hospital where tests were just inconclusive. The next day, I returned to my house with my future ex-husband as my backup. We scrounged the house looking for any signs of a break-in, but there wasn't any. We then heard a loud noise in the basement. We ran downstairs only to be met with a frigid stale air that smelled like the acidic scent of mangroves. And then suddenly before my eyes, part of the basement ground literally fell through to reveal a perfectly square hole. My husband and I were shook. Just a few moments ago, we were down in the basement and we saw no hole. Now there's a 3x3 perfect square hole. Dumb as my husband was, and there's a reason why we're divorced, he stuck his hand inside and felt a bone on the surface, telling me to call the cops, there's a dead body here. Police excavated the basement and found 2 bodies. The first was thought to have been, my first thought was it had to be my uncle. Since 18 years old, he had owned the home after his parents died in 1944. However, examiners determined the body would have been killed by excruciating torture to the genital regions and blunt force trauma to the head around that date. At that time, my uncle was overseas fighting Nazis in World War II and didn't return back from Paris until 1947. To this day, we have no idea why parts of the house were so frigid, who was screaming for help, or if my uncle was a murderer. It left my entire family in the dark, and worst of all, the foundation was completely destroyed. We end up just knocking down the house completely and just selling the property as is. Not exactly the way you think your first listing will go, if you ask me, anyways. Well, there you have it. 3 paranormal stories from the perspective view of a realtor. I gotta be honest with you though, the first one's probably the worst in my opinion, simply because it deals with a child in a paranormal activity or horror story of any type. Children in that just bad, bad juju's just never a good side. But the fact that one guy had a perfectly square hole in the basement randomly appear and find bones, that would have been creepy as can be. And then the snowy cabin, essentially, as I'll call it, yeah, that that would have been a clear sign to just get out. When that knife randomly came out of nowhere, would have been like, nope, I'm out later. But I don't know. Let me know what you think about these stories. And of course, if you like this type of content, make sure you hit that like button, that subscribe button, stay up to date with all future content. Other than that, I hope you all have a fantastic day. And until next time, take care.